Welcome to Dr. Michelle's Wild Warrior podcast. Thanks for joining me today. This episode I've titled The Great Unveiling, and I have a few things to say about what is happening in the world today, which is a lot of various things that we all are well aware, and it's affecting many of us in our daily lives, and some more so than others, obviously. It's sparking a lot of controversy and dispute and debate, and my concern is that we're really stepping away from kindness and compassion and healing, and we've stepped a lot more into dissonance and debate, as I mentioned, and just this polarization that is really unfortunately not resolving any of the problems. It's really just firing people up and creating more, I think, frustration and anger and resentment and divisiveness. And really, I feel like the things that we have in front of us right now could best be addressed if we work on uniting and seeing each other's perspective and changing our viewpoint so that we can take charge of the things we have power over, which is a lot, in my opinion. And so I am going to be unapologetic today. Sometimes I tend to want to make sure that I'm, being gentle in my speech, and not that I plan on being harsh, but I just want to talk about some topics rather directly instead of dancing around that with some niceties and, I just want to be direct, and I want to speak from the heart and speak truthfully. And I, as a physician, I've been really just pouring over the data and reading a lot of different studies. And, obviously I see the news and I see the headlines and I understand the caseloads and what's happening. But I also try and dive deeper into the scientific data as best I can, even though that becomes skewed sometimes too. And I find that it's kind of my job to make sure I stay on top of all that. And so I definitely, you'll feel probably some of my opinions come through, but really I just like to present the information and my concerns for what we're doing with that information and some of the misguided things that have been happening. So let's kind of start again. The reason I titled this podcast The Great Unveiling is because I believe that this virus in particular, this pandemic in particular, is essentially showing us the way. It's showing us the things we need to fix. It's highlighting the broken parts of our society, the disease that we have underlying in our country in particular, in our culture. I think we have a lot of underlying comorbidities that are a factor of many things that I will try and go into a little bit. And I think that, mentally and emotionally, we've all come up against some patterns that need to shift, and will hopefully, as I've mentioned, move from divisiveness toward camaraderie and kind of a united force, because this is not us against a virus. What I think it is, I think the real underlying cause is us changing our health and changing that health of our planet as well, so that we can move forward in a way that's sustainable and that's healthful and, obviously is supportive for generations to come, because our kids are the ones who are going to bear the brunt of so many of our decisions that we're making now. So that being said, again, I feel like this virus is just kind of uncovering some of the underlying causes of disease, we can say, that have been lingering and underneath the surface for a really long time. And this virus just kind of is highlighting those things. And I think a lot of them are changeable without, drastic measures. I think a lot of those things are changeable just with some lifestyle and nutrition support. And that's what I do as a practitioner. as naturopaths, our philosophy is rooted so deeply in treating the cause of disease rather than masking or just addressing symptoms. And I love that part of our philosophy. It's something that I come back to all the time when I'm working with patients. This is why I ask them questions about their spirituality and about their sleep and about their relationships and their emotional responses to things, what their body temperature runs on a daily basis, whether they're hot or cold, or who they surround themselves with, what kinds of things create distress for them or harmony. And the big picture is really, really essential to understand kind of the underlying dis-ease, as we like to call it. And so I think that the same is true in this global kind of situation, and especially for our country, where we have not been faring so well. There's a lot of finger pointing happening as to why, and sure, there's been some mistakes. I mean, I don't think anybody does emergencies and pandemics gracefully. Not to say that we shouldn't improve on that. I definitely think we can, but I also recognize that, again, I think that the state of our health as a community, as a collective in our country, was already at this place of vulnerability. And again, I think COVID is exposing dramatically and unfortunately with a lot of loss of life, and also loss of quality of life for many people. And that is the part that we really can address and we need to address. I won't go into the deep, dark places of our health paradigm that I feel like are not serving us well, but obviously those are playing a pretty significant role in people being at their optimal health. But there are many things that people can do as individuals to change something about themselves to make them less vulnerable in the future, and also to make the rest of us less vulnerable. Because everybody's touting masks, and I understand the logic in that. I don't totally see all the data supporting it, but I've read a lot about the effectiveness, and I won't go into my opinions about that. We in Oregon have no, it's a mandate, so we have to wear masks in public, and I understand that the intention in that is good, and I am willing to follow the rules on that, obviously. And of course, in my practice, I protect my patients at all costs, first do no harm always, and respect their needs and their wishes and their comfort level as well. But I think that there's many more things that we could be doing proactively to keep others from getting sick from us. And so I feel like, just like with my patients, I want to empower them to be able to take charge of their health. And I joke with them that I don't go home with them at night, so they get homework from me, because that's the way they're going to actually make things better for themselves, is by doing the daily kind of activities and support of my basic treatment guidelines, to get their body at its utmost health on a regular basis and consistently over time. And I believe that there's plenty of opportunity to do that, and that by each of us taking charge of our own health in the best ways we can, then we minimize the risk to everyone else, because we're less vulnerable. We are less likely to be spreading around a contagion, because we're just less vulnerable to getting it and having sequelae and fallout from it, or dying from it. So before I dive in, since I mentioned death, I think that's also an issue where we as Americans have so much fear and apprehension, for good reason. I understand. We all want to be alive. We don't want to lose somebody that we love. Personally, I've been through the death of both of my parents from chronic cancer, disease, and witnessed some beautiful things throughout that process, and perhaps that sounds strange, but if you've witnessed death and the process of death, even though it's not, it's sad and tragic and it's a loss, there's also some huge spiritual gifts and emotional gifts that can happen through the process. And so I was very fortunate to be able to assist my parents, if you can call it that, and just be by their side. And really they taught me about this cycle of life that we are all inevitably engaged in. And just being alive means that death is always there. And I don't use that as a scare tactic or as, dark, although some people may see it that way. It's inescapable, and it's a part of life, and just like any other cycles of life that we are a part of, sleep wake, or rest digest, or any of the other cycles that we are in, living pretending that death isn't there is, I think, not fully living. Because when you start to recognize that things are kind of fleeting, and that every moment that we have is a gift, then you shift your perspective, you shift your gumption for life. And I find that a true blessing. It also allows us to really be more engaged and more present and more compassionate. And those are all qualities that we desperately need to embrace each other with that right now, if not more than ever. So I think that shifting our relationship with death, and whatever that looks like for you individually, or in your family, or with your religious practices or your spiritual practices, or if you don't have any of those things, like figuring out ways to make some peace with the fact that we're all going to die someday, and that's okay, and that's part of living, and can really invoke this zest for life that I think we all deserve to have. And it can also motivate us to be much more healthful and take charge of our health, so that because if you recognize that you have this potential to live until, 80, 90 years old potentially, I, for one, want to go out, feeling great. I think I've mentioned this before, but Dr. Andrew Weil calls it, or I don't know if he dubbed this phrase, but I heard him speak about it one time, and he calls it compressed morbidity. And I really appreciate that expression. It's like, live fully, healthfully, in a way that suits you as a human being, and allows you to offer your gifts to the world, and to experience and grow and learn, and all of these things, be mobile and creative, and have thriving relationships up until the minute that you are gone. And that means limiting chronic disease. That means improving your physical fitness and your health overall, so that you can do all those things. And there are plenty of ways to improve upon your health every single day. And that's what I'm here to really address today. So to circle back to COVID and this kind of daunting, epidemic that we have hanging over us, and there's, so much fear, understandably in a lot of ways. I do think now, at the beginning of it all, we were all so unsure. And there was a lot of unknowns, and there were a lot of factors that we didn't understand. And now we've had some time. There's been a lot of scientific study. There's been a lot of case studies. There's been countries doing different things than other countries. And so there's data out there to learn from. And I think there's this place of like, yes, there's a lot of cases, but we're starting to recognize that, overall many hospitalizations are decreasing and mortality is slowly decreasing over time. I'm not saying it's gone, but, things are shifting, and we have this better understanding of who is really at risk. And I see a lot of headlines that kind of counter some of those things that we do know through the data. And those are startling and scary, but, a lot of times when you read into them, not read into them, but read into what they're quoting and look at the research studies that they're referencing, a lot of times that information is not nearly what the headline is, scaring you into believing. So let's get back to risk factors. The biggest ones that we know of right now, and these have consistently kind of been the case as far as comorbidities go. Obviously, we know it's affecting the elderly more intensely, and I think that some of these comorbidities are actually a big factor in that, not just age itself. But the top three that I'd like to briefly speak about are obesity, number one, and that's probably what I'm going to spend the most time on, hypertension, high blood pressure, and heart disease. And, there's others that put you at higher risk for sure, but those are kind of the big three. And obesity's, I've been researching that more, and that's the one that is so interesting to me because it is such a huge prevalence in our country in particular. And for example, and please, I am going to be apologetic about this, or at least preemptive about this, but no way, shape, or form would I ever body shame anybody. That is not what this is about. This is about empowerment. And we all know that being at an ideal weight ultimately brings you better health. And that doesn't mean, you have to drop 200 pounds or whatever that is, but it means moving toward, being at an optimal health for your body type. And that looks different for different people. So that's just my one caveat, because I want you to know that I, respect where people are in their lives, and I know things are challenging to change in lifestyle and nutrition. I work with a lot of people of different weights and different sizes, and different limitations on that, different histories as far as eating disorders and, physical limitations as far as exercise is concerned. So I have compassion for all of those extremes. So please don't hear that I'm, trying to say that you have to be a certain way or whatever. But I want you to be your best self, and that's what we can all work toward. It's not, it's always the goal. It's always the journey, and that's constantly available to us. So improvement is always there. We can change things every single day about what we do in our daily routine. And I just encourage you to think about that. So circling back to obesity, I think our country is the most obese in the world. I didn't verify that data, but I've heard that, and I'm guessing that we're at least in the very top notches of that. And that's been a big change in the last 50 years. If you go on the CDC site for obesity rates, and you start back when they first started tracking, which I think was in the 70s, maybe the 80s, there's, color-coded charts of the United States and which states were dealing with more obesity than others. And it's amazing. You can watch them from year to year, and the color patterns that change over that time is just, it's dramatic, and it's heartbreaking because we know the health implications that come along with obesity. And now more than ever, it's one of the biggest risk factors with COVID. And so, it's really interesting to think about the fact that adipose tissue, fat tissue in our body, literally becomes its own endocrine organ. It starts secreting different hormones and is responsible for big shifts in our hormone balance. And that also obviously is connected to our insulin levels and our blood sugar levels, and, our kidney function, our heart function. So the ramification and mental health actually too, it's a higher risk for Alzheimer's too when we have blood sugar dysregulation, which happens with obesity often. So there's kind of this myriad of health conditions that manifest and one is vulnerable to if they're not at an optimal body weight or healthier body weight. And COVID is hugely affecting folks that are obese. And so that is something that we as a country, I don't know why people aren't shouting from the rooftops about this. Like, why are we not getting people eating better? Why are we not encouraging exercise and activity? People keep joking about the COVID-15 or whatever, the weight gain, because there's been some stress. People have been home. There's fear, there's unknown, but it doesn't have to be that way. There's so many options for making sure that you're eating good food and that you're keeping your body moving. You don't have to necessarily be able to go to the gym to be able to take care of your physical health. So, here I live in a fortunate place. I chose to live here for many of these reasons, but I can hit the trails whenever I want. And even when things were kind of shut down, I was still able to get outside and move my body. And that was always a priority. It has been for me, but it was especially during this time because I knew the ramifications of being, in front of the TV more and kind of watching the news and working less. And my kids were home, so, I wasn't schlepping them around and doing activities with them. And so I knew that I kind of had to be like combative almost to that, the fact that we were locked down. But I had weights, I had things I could do, and I could jump rope on my back deck and, hit the trails whenever I could. And I've talked to a lot of my patients who've been walking more than ever, and they're really enjoying it. They're really happy to be outside and moving their bodies in nature. And I think that's, one of the best things we can do. But why aren't we talking about it? Why aren't we talking about this? I saw this, I think it was a little like coupon or something that was going around on Facebook that was in Louisiana, which my family's from New Orleans and dear loved ones down there. And they've been hit pretty hard in the city because everything was kind of right after Mardi Gras. But there was a coupon or something for like, come get your COVID test, and then you get a free meal at McDonald's afterward. And that is, you could think of it as humorous, but it's so upsetting to me to think about that. Why would we be looking at a disease that we know one of the biggest risk factors for it is obesity, and we're encouraging people to eat, terribly? And that's just incomprehensible to me and definitely upsetting, like I said. And again, it's not about blame. It's more just like, let's educate the population. And that's what I feel like kind of my mission is, to help people understand what kind of risk factors they have. And those are changeable. I know it's daunting to think like, oh, I've got, an extra 75 pounds on or whatever, and how can I change that overnight? Well, you can't, but you can change some things overnight. You can get a good night's sleep. You can change some patterns in your health. You can drink more water. You can take Epsom salt baths, that help detox. You can decide to start cooking for yourself. And there's ways to do that on a low budget even. And so it's not just financially limited. I think this kind of thing is available. I've seen like small rural towns that have decided to, do like community gardens and just get people involved in eating healthier, because they recognize that their town is more at risk for various health conditions. I saw, one example of that before COVID. But anyway, I just think that there's a lot of evidence supporting the fact that obesity is a big risk factor, and that's something that we have the chance to change culturally, societally, and individually. And I really hope that we can see that. So there was an article that I'm going to reference about, let's see if this is the one I want to read about real quick. Hold on one second. Yeah, so just some of the immune responses that can happen from obesity when we have an increased BMI. One study, this was in the American Journal of Physiology and Endocrinology from July of this year, and they were looking at obesity and COVID, and they connected an increased BMI, body mass index, increased the need for ventilation, and also increased the severity of cases. And then also in the vent, that is like 80% or something of people die if they're put on a ventilator, not because it's the cause necessarily, but because the severity is so bad. So that's a really, a place you don't want to be. And increased BMI also directly correlates to increased risk of hospitalization from COVID. And so, and to circle back to kind of what I was talking about adipose tissue and the endocrine system, here's a quote from the article. In recent years, as the role of adipose tissue as a distinct endocrine organ is being elucidated, obesity has been considered an independent risk factor for increased susceptibility to infections, sepsis, and higher mortality. And they're looking at overall infection, not just COVID, obviously, because they were talking about over the years. But essentially what happens is we have this baseline of inflammation and immune kind of malfunction. I don't like to say like boost the immune system, because sometimes the immune system's overactive, so we don't want that either. We want kind of a balanced immune function and optimal immune function. So basically, just at baseline, people with, higher body mass indexes have more propensity for what's called the cytokine storm, which is essentially our immune system almost overacting when it's exposed to COVID. They have more risk of inflammatory markers coming up during that time, which can increase infiltrates in the lungs. It affects the vasculature. So we know with this virus in particular, it's creating this hypoxia, it's creating problems in the lungs, and also with the red blood cells. And so we've been, you've seen reports probably of damage to fingers and toes and the kidneys, and that's because it's affecting the vasculature in those organs where, things are very vulnerable. And so with obesity, that vascular effect is already slightly at risk because of the underlying inflammation. So then you add this viral response, and, it's kind of a recipe for some real damage, if not mortality, which is, totally unfortunate. Coupled with obesity, oftentimes we see heart disease and or hypertension, and those are the other two risk factors. So then we're talking about literally all three risk factors. And in our country, we have so many people on medications for heart disease, and usually on a statin of some sort because their cholesterol's out of whack and or not optimal, and hypertension medications, and both of those can increase what's called ACE2 receptors. You've probably heard that referenced in the media and in the news, and ACE2 receptors are where this virus likes to bind, and that's kind of its gateway into our system. And so if we have increased ACE2 receptors because we've been on an ACE2 inhibitor, then the virus basically has more doors to come in to our home and bind to our cells and create damage there. And so those three factors are often come together: obesity, hypertension, and heart disease. And so the medications themselves can make people more at risk also. And so we've got this kind of perfect storm for a disease that, again, like I said, is kind of unveiling these underlying health conditions that we have in our country and that we're not addressing. And I just don't understand it. I don't understand why we aren't talking about nutrition. Why are we not talking about what kinds of things people should be eating? Why are we not talking about good sleep and its effect on the immune system and on our circadian rhythm and our blood sugar levels? Why are we not talking about hydrating and making sure people are drinking water instead of soda? I heard on another podcast he was talking about a similar kind of thing, and he said, look, people always say it's expensive to eat healthfully. Well, it can be a little more expensive for sure, but you can grow your own food. His advice was, put down the soda and just drink some water. That's cheaper. And I think that's true. There's some situations where this doesn't have to be a huge overhaul. It's like just make one choice over another. And I find that, we have, like I said, we have so much polarization and the shaming that's happening in our society. Like, if you don't do it my way, or the way that like the main narrative is saying, then you're either a hater, or you want my grandma dead, or you're whatever political camp, that somebody wants to put you in. And that's not helpful, first of all. And secondly, we need to take politics out of this situation and really just look at what's happening to the health of our society and to fellow human beings. I mean, let's be compassionate about that. Just and again, like, let's take charge of the things we have control over in our daily life. And that, number one, is what we put into our bodies. I'm not scared of the virus. I'm scared of what's happening to our planet, what's happening to relationships, and, ultimately what's happening to our social connections with each other and life on this earth. That's what scares me. And it's not acceptable the way people are treating each other. It's just not. Yeah, I get on my high horse and fired up in my soapbox or whatever about what I believe in. And I disagree with a lot of things that are out there, even a lot of the mainstream narrative that's happening right now. And I'm a doctor, so I'm not stupid because I disagree with some of the things that are being touted as the right way to go. I've researched it, I've looked at it, I've read it. I disagree with it. That's it. It's not a political position. It's not because I want to be controversial. It's because what I've seen in my practice is, people have to shift their whole health to make things better. If somebody comes in with a sprained ankle, for example, and they want to come and see me to get treated and to get it diagnosed potentially, or to have acupuncture for pain, I'm also going to ask them about how they're sleeping, because they're not going to heal very well if they're not sleeping well. I'm also going to recommend that they change the way they're eating if it's not ideal for their body. I'm not going to just turn a blind eye to the fact that they're drinking, 10 sodas a day and eating like sugar and fried food, and that's it. Like, that's going to be a part of my conversation, because the ankle is going to heal way faster if they get healthier. And then I'm going to talk to them about strength. Like, how can we get you mobile and moving and exercising in a way that potentially prevents, injuries such as those. So it's not about, putting people down like that. First of all, we all know that doesn't work, right? Like, if you've ever had a coach in your life, did it help if he just like berated you, or she berated you, or guilted you, or shamed you? No, like, not at all. Yes, you got to know about some things you need to improve. That's what a good coach does, for sure. But you also need somebody to point out the things that are working and that you're talented at, and encourage you on that front as well. And so I think that it's upsetting to me to watch what is happening on social media and on the news that is so us against you, us against them. Like, just this, like I've mentioned a couple times already, just very divisive places. And again, it's just not helping anything to shame people, or to guilt people, or to say that they're selfish because they choose one thing or another. There's a lot of data that's confusing and it's ambiguous, and I don't always agree with what comes from the top down just because one person is an expert, quote unquote. I like to listen to other experts too and hear what they have to say, and not assume that they're, dumb or crazy or whatever because their religious beliefs are different than mine, or because their cultural beliefs are different than mine, or because they, studied, hand surgery versus, heart surgery. I mean, there's a lot of really good practitioners in the world, and I think it's nice to kind of do the research and look at the literature and understand, where things are. I'll give you an example. I saw a headline posted, I'm sure it was on Facebook or something, the other day. And the headline was something to the effect that, kids are more infective than we thought and more spreading the disease more than we thought. And so I was like, I want to read more about that. I have 3 kids. I am a practitioner of a lot of kids, and I want to understand, what is the real risk. We haven't really seen that in the numbers. Yes, there's some cases in kids, but their fallout is pretty limited and low. So I knew that, and thankfully their mortality is very, very low. So that's really good news. But I was curious, so I looked at the 2 studies that they referenced in this article. It was a news article, and then there were 2 scientific studies referenced, and one of them was JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association, and that study showed that nasopharynx samples, so like basically swabs of kids 5 and under, had higher viral counts than older people, kids or adults. And but nowhere did it say that translated into them being more infective, or that they've seen that there have been higher cases because of kids under 5. So it was distorted information essentially. Like, yes, they might have a higher viral load, but that doesn't mean that we can't extrapolate from that statement and say, well, they're definitely transmitting more. No, we don't know that. We just know that they have higher virus levels in their nose when they're 5 and under. That's all that study demonstrated, which is fair information, and we need to look at it and we need to consider it. But the fear-based headline of this article definitely was touting more than that, and insinuating more than that, I should say. And then the other article that they referenced was a preprint article, not peer-reviewed, from Italy, and that study, the final part of it was basically saying that kids are more likely to spread COVID to immediate family members in close quarters, which any parent knows that like once you have a kid, you get sick a lot in those first few years, because they are kind of little transmitters, petri dishes, one can say. And so that's not groundbreaking information. Yeah, of course they're going to transmit. In fact, when I read that, my brain went to, well, that's kind of an argument against sheltering in place, because, or at least, staying enclosed in your home. And that doesn't mean not social distancing, but I find that that's an interesting thing, because it's showing us like maybe we need to get outdoors a little bit more, maybe we need to open the windows, maybe we need to move around and not be in such close quarters all the time with the same people. So neither of those articles were saying, oh, kids are big transmitters. They were saying what they said, which I just explained to you. So again, though, when you read that headline in the news or in an article, a news article, it sounds shocking, and it sounds like, oh man, have we been wrong all this time? And all of a sudden, so I won't go into what I think about schools. I think that, well, I will just say this: it's one of the most challenging situations, and I have total respect for everybody who's making decisions around schools, and I think it's got to be one of the hardest things that anybody's ever faced, and I hope the public school system survives this, because we need them, and I respect all the teachers out there that are trying to make this work for our children. So that's my only caveat on schools. And yeah, so I think what I'm seeing, it seems to me that people are, again, just kind of drowning in their fear. And understandably, I get it. It's scary, it's mysterious, but this isn't new. I mean, we call this a novel virus. Well, coronaviruses have been around for a while. We have viruses around us and in us, like so many that we can't even think about, right? Our brains can't even compute the volume of viruses in our bodies, in the air. So it's not new. If viruses wanted us dead, we'd be dead long ago. They are a part of our genetic makeup. They're a part of how we evolve. They are a part of shifting things in the world. They're a part of our gut, and our virome and how we absorb. So this isn't new, and it's not going away, which in that I mean we're going to have other, viruses that come through, or other types of infectious agents that show us, again, where are we weak. I watched a Jane Goodall thing, a little video blurb that she had 2 months ago or something. And, her point was, look what we're doing to the earth. We're kind of unearthing, literally, all of these infectious agents that are telling us some information. They're relaying information. This is my thought based on what she said, but I feel like they are shining some light on the places where our systems are broken. And one of those systems is what we're doing to the planet, and we are not in a sustainable place right now. And the only way we can heal and make this less likely to happen again in this severity that it has is by kind of uprooting all our systems that have been in place and changing the way we do things, and I'm seeing it. It's great. People are growing their own food. People are shopping at the farmers markets. Folks are coming together in communities to figure out how to educate their children, in addition to the virtual learning that we have available to us. People are coming together, and that's what brings me some hope, for the future here. Instead of just sitting back, waiting in fear for somebody to tell you how to live your life. I will mention the vaccine, and I know that's super controversial, and even just talking about vaccines is risky these days, which I don't even understand why, because any other medication, we would all want safety trials, we would all want peer reviewed, we would all want double-blind studies, we would want time under the belt, as it always has been when we do studies on medications. And so I don't understand why there's this dogmatic concept of, you're either an anti-vaxxer or you're pro-vaxxer, and there's nothing in between. And I don't agree with that. I'm sorry, but I don't. I think that a safe vaccine is really, really an important thing. And, there's so many shortcuts happening right now because this is under the guise of emergency use authority. And so, the safety trial for one company was 3 months, and it was on 45 people, and there were people who had fallout from it in that group. And that's not a very promising, safety trial. And now it's already in phase 3, and that's the majority of vaccines can take 10 plus years, sometimes 20, to come through safety trials and efficacy trials, and to make sure that there's no fallout in long-term use. And that's a good thing. I mean, we really want to make sure, especially if we're injecting it into people, like, that this is safe. I mean, you wouldn't hop on like a zip line that failed, even say there were 45 uses of it and it failed like even twice. And I think that some of the side effects that we're seeing, and maybe even hospitalizations in that first round of phase 1, was more than that. So I'm being generous. But I mean, I wouldn't be cool with hopping on a zip line that I knew had failed, multiple times. I mean, that's a silly example, but, it's also the real deal. And, we can't just wait around for a vaccine. If there's a safe one that's efficacious, then that's one thing to consider. But we wouldn't know that for at least 10 years. So are we all planning on staying holed up for 10 years? Or I don't even understand that. Like, I can't wrap my brain around it when there's other options available to us, making sure your vitamin D is adequate, getting outside in the sun, moving your body, exercising, decreasing your weight if you're overweight, eating healthful foods. Those are all tried and true. They're not some I joke that I'm a witch doctor just because it's fun, but I'm not. I'm a doctor, and I just know herbs, and I, study energetic medicine through Chinese medicine, which is different, but, it's all still rooted in science. And those are tried and true. We know they benefit the immune system. We know that they benefit our health overall. We know that they decrease our body weight when we eat healthfully and nutritious foods that are nourishing, and when we sleep well, and when we engage in laughter, and when we have physical contact, and when we love people, and have healthy relationships, and decrease our trauma or work on our trauma if we have it, which most of us do in some way. So there's all these things that we can do, and I'm not seeing that in the news. I'm not seeing any of that stuff. I don't understand why. Why is that controversial to take care of our bodies? I don't understand. And so that's what I'm here to talk about today, or to, finish up talking about here in a second, is just what you can do. And I feel like we all have an obligation to do that, So this whole there's so much controversy about what medications might work and what, and I have not been on the front lines. I can't say what happens when people are bad sick from COVID. I've read about it and I've researched it, but I haven't, thankfully, none of my patients have had COVID that I've seen in person. So I'm definitely not a frontline doctor. And so I have huge compassion and understanding for the challenges of that, and respect for what they're doing. But my whole type of practice is based in preventive medicine. And so if I can keep my patients healthier and, living their lives in a way that feels good to them, and where they can thrive and their families can thrive, then that's really the goal. And I feel like we all have that available to us, even now, even with the restrictions that are happening. You have the capability to get outside and move your body and breathe and sleep and choose good foods and love up on your family and your friends and your lovers and your dogs and whoever's around you. So I encourage you to live your life. Please don't live in fear. Find the love within you that allows you to shine brightly and be who you are. Share your gifts with us. We need it more than ever right now. Get some sleep every single night. Take deep breaths, long, slow breaths, long exhales, and nourish your body with healthy foods. Get outside in the sunshine. Make sure you're getting adequate vitamin D, vitamin C, the basic nutrition that we need to live every single day. Please be social. Please, please, please. The psychological effects and the emotional effects of this, lockdown, and the stressors that a lot of people have been enduring are just unfathomable. And so we are social beings. We need people. So figure out ways that feel comfortable to you to make that happen. And I encourage you to have a critical eye. Look at things outside the box a little bit, and try not to get caught up in one narrative, one way of looking at things. So yes, we need some guidance. Yes, we have experts around us all the time, but think also with your intelligent brain, and make sure that you are making choices that are best for you and your family and your community. And, I feel like living in fear is not going to serve you well. And so whatever you can do to work on quelling that fear and minimizing your risks by taking charge of your own health, because that is in your power right this minute, today, now. And I encourage you to do that. So and start talking to people about it. Like, there are a lot of things you can change. You can change heart disease. I see it happen all the time. I work with patients with heart conditions, and I work with patients who've had hypertension and come in on all kinds of medications, and then eventually they don't have to be on them anymore. I've worked with people who've had struggles with their weight for a long time, and they work on things and they get to a healthier place. It's totally possible, and I see people do it all the time. So let's do it. Let's change things. Let's be a healthier nation and shift this so that we're at less risk for each other by being our healthiest self. That's the actual answer here. There is a cure. The cure is to be your healthiest self. It doesn't mean that you won't succumb to the virus. You might get sick, but it does mean that you're going to fare a lot better in most situations. And that's huge for you, for your family, and for all of us that need you here. So if you have questions, commentary, I always welcome them. And I'm sending this out always with love, 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 love to all of you. And I encourage you to just make one change today that will benefit your health. Decide on what that is, whether it's 10 minutes of deep breaths or long, slow breaths. If it's, going to bed a little bit earlier, or choosing not to have some dessert tonight because you just don't really need it, or drinking more water, or moving your body in a different way. Any of those, choose one. Just choose one and make it a week habit and see how it goes for a week, and see if it stays for longer than that. Again, lots of love to all of you. Be your best self, be healthy, stay strong, and I will see you next time.